In the year 1887, in a small European town, a little boy came into the world like any other child, fragile, innocent, and full of potential. He was born into a family of modest means, people who worked tirelessly to provide for their children, even when survival itself was a daily struggle. At that time, life was far from easy. Disease spread quickly, medical knowledge was limited, and even the most ordinary illness could become a death sentence. Childhood was a fragile stage of life with no guarantee of reaching adulthood. The boy's name has been lost to history, but his story has not. He was a child like so many others, curious about the world, quick to smile, and eager to run through the streets with his friends. His family adored him. His mother, in particular, cherished every moment with him, because in those days, parents always carried the quiet fear of losing a child. Infant and child mortality rates were shockingly high. A simple fever could escalate to something fatal, and medicine was not yet advanced enough to protect the vulnerable. As the boy grew, his parents dared to hope. They watched him play in the fields, laugh with other children, and dream of becoming something greater. He had favorite foods, favorite games, and even small dreams, like learning to read, helping his father, and perhaps one day building a better life. But fate can be merciless. In the early months of 1887, illness swept through the town. Some said it was influenza, others whispered about pneumonia, while still others feared it might be tuberculosis, a dreaded disease of the era. Whatever it was, the boy fell sick. At first, it seemed like a normal cold, the kind that children usually bounce back from. But as days passed, his fever climbed, his energy drained, and his once bright eyes grew dim. The family called upon the town doctor, but medicine in those days was limited to herbal remedies, bloodletting, and the faint hope of rest. Antibiotics had not yet been discovered. Hospitals were places few could afford, and often they were overcrowded and dangerous. His parents did everything they could: cold compresses, broths, whispered prayers, but nothing stopped the illness from tightening its grip. Soon, the boy could no longer rise from his bed. His laughter, once so lively, was replaced with shallow breaths and weak whispers. His small body shook with fever, and his parents, helpless, could only hold his hands and beg him to fight. His mother sang lullabies at his bedside, the same ones she had sung when he was an infant, as though the familiar sound might call him back from the brink. His father, though strong in front of others, would step outside and weep quietly, broken by his inability to save his son. And then the moment came. The boy, who had barely lived, who had barely begun to dream, took his last breath. His parents sat in stunned silence, their world shattered. In those few minutes, the house, once filled with laughter and hope, became unbearably heavy with grief. This was not an unusual tragedy in 1887. Families all across the world faced the same heartbreak. But when it happens to you, when it is your child, the grief feels endless, unbearable, and uniquely cruel. His parents knew they had little to remember him by. Photographs were rare and expensive in those days. Most families never had the chance to capture their children's faces before death came. The boy had never sat for a portrait. They had no image to hold on to, no way to keep his memory alive, except for one chilling practice that was becoming common in Victorian society: the post-mortem photograph. But before that decision came, they sat with him grieving. His mother touched his cold cheeks, brushing his hair gently, as though he might open his eyes again. His father, stoic in front of neighbors, finally broke down, whispering apologies to a son he could not save. For them, this was not just a boy. They had lost their future, their joy, their reason for enduring life's hardships. And yet, even in tragedy, there was a strange form of beauty. The short life of this child, though cut short, reminded those around him of the fragility of existence. The boy's death spoke louder than many lives that stretched on for decades. It forced his parents, his neighbors, and eventually even strangers who saw his story, to understand the value of every single day. In the world we live in today, with its modern medicine and long life expectancy, it is easy to take time for granted. But in 1887, people lived with constant awareness that tomorrow was not promised. The boy's death was not just a personal loss. It was a stark reminder to everyone who knew him that life is fleeting, and love must be expressed while there is still time. This keynote, A life cut short is not just about death. It is about awareness. It is about the truth that none of us knows how long we have, and every moment with those we love could be the last. It is a call to gratitude, to urgency, to purpose. The boy did not live to see adulthood. He never had the chance to chase his dreams, to learn to grow, or to become the man he might have been. But his short life continues to inspire more than a century later. His story, preserved in a photograph that some call disturbing, is in fact a testament. Even the shortest life can teach the deepest lessons. So while we mourn the boy who was preserved in 1887, we also thank him for reminding us to live fully, to love openly, and to treasure every day. In the late 19th century, photography was not what it is today. Today, nearly everyone carries a camera in their pocket. We take pictures of our meals, our pets, our children, even moments so ordinary they're forgotten in days. But in 1887, things were very different. Photography was expensive, slow, and often reserved only for life's most important moments. For most working-class families, a single photograph might be the only image they ever possessed in their lifetime. For the boy's family, the tragedy of his early death was only magnified by the fact that they had never taken his picture while he was alive. They had no frozen image of his smile, no captured memory of his eyes glancing with mischief or joy. Once he was gone, there was nothing left but fading memories. And memories, as every grieving parent knows, are fragile. Over time, the sound of his laughter might fade. The sharpness of his features might blur in their minds. The family feared that even their grief could not preserve him forever. This is why, in their despair, they turned to a practice that, to us today, may seem shocking, even disturbing: the post-mortem photograph. In Victorian society, death was not hidden the way it often is today. It was a part of everyday life. High child mortality rates meant that parents often buried several children before adulthood. Families mourned openly, and rituals surrounding death were elaborate and deeply symbolic. When a child died, families wanted desperately to preserve their memory. But since very few had the luxury of cameras during life, the next best option was to capture the child's likeness after death. These photographs were not taken in secrecy. They were cherished. Parents displayed them in frames, kept them in albums, and sometimes even sent copies to distant relatives as a way of saying, "He was here. He lived. Remember him." When the boy's parents made the decision, it was not one of vanity but of love. They dressed him carefully, choosing his best clothes, the same way they would have prepared him for a special occasion. His hair was combed neatly, his little hands folded. In some cases, photographers would prop the deceased upright, positioning them as though they were still alive, sitting in a chair or lying in bed peacefully, eyes closed as if merely asleep. For this boy, the photographer likely posed him in a way that captured innocence and dignity. The process took time. Photography then required patience, long exposure, and absolute stillness. In a sense, the boy's stillness made the photograph possible. The image that emerged was haunting, the face of a child frozen in eternal silence. To outsiders, the picture may have looked unsettling. But for his parents, it was a treasure beyond price. It was their only photograph of their son, the only chance they had to hold his likeness, to show future generations who he was. To them, the image was not of death but of love. Modern audiences often recoil when they learn about post-mortem photography. We are accustomed to hiding death, sanitizing it, and avoiding its presence in daily life. But for families in 1887, this was not morbid, it was sacred. Think about it: when a loved one dies today, we have hundreds, sometimes thousands of photos to remember them by. But imagine if you had none. Imagine if, after your child died, all you had left was fading memory. Would you not grasp at the chance to preserve their face in some way? For grieving parents, the post-mortem photograph was not disturbing. It was a final act of devotion, a refusal to let their child vanish without a trace. In a sense, these photographs gave parents permission to keep mourning, but also to keep remembering. Every time they looked at that picture, they could say, "He was real. He existed. His life mattered." The boy's photograph, preserved for over a century, still stirs emotions today. It is more than just an old picture. It is a piece of history, a fragment of human experience that connects us across time. It forces us to confront the fragility of life, the inevitability of death, and the depth of parental love. While some may call it disturbing, the truth is that the image holds meaning far beyond its surface. It whispers a lesson across the decades. Do not wait until it is too late to capture and cherish your loved ones. Take photos, yes, but more importantly, create memories. Live fully with them while they are alive. What makes this practice motivational is not the photograph itself, but the story behind it. It reminds us that human beings have always struggled with loss and always found ways to keep love alive even when life ended. Today, we live in a world where photographs are easy. But how often do we truly value them? How many pictures do we scroll past without feeling their weight? The boy's preserved image teaches us to see photographs as more than pixels. They are time capsules of love, moments that may one day be the only connection to someone we can no longer touch. The boy's parents preserved him not for curiosity, not for art, but for memory. They wanted his story to remain, and in doing so, they unknowingly left us a gift, a reason to value the lives we still have, and to appreciate the people who surround us every day. Even though the boy's life was short, and even though his photograph shows him in stillness rather than laughter, his presence has endured far beyond what anyone in 1887 could have imagined. That single photograph became a monument. It immortalized not just his image, but also the devotion of a family who refused to let him be forgotten. So, while many may see only the strangeness of post-mortem photography, those who look deeper will see something else, a family's desperate act of love, and a timeless reminder of the value of every fleeting moment we have with those we love. The death of a child is often described as the most unbearable pain a human being can endure. It goes against the natural order of life. Parents expect to watch their children grow, to see them walk, talk, learn, and eventually step into adulthood. They imagine their children outliving them, carrying forward the family's story. But when that cycle is broken, when a child dies before the parent, the grief is unlike anything else. It is heavy, unrelenting, and often impossible to put into words. For the boy's parents in 1887, that grief was overwhelming. They had raised their son with hope, even in a time when childhood mortality was painfully common. Every cough, every fever was a source of worry, but parents always clung to the hope that their child would be the one to survive, to grow strong, to live on. When their boy died, their world collapsed in an instant. For the mother, the loss was deeply personal. She had carried him in her womb, felt his first kicks, heard his first cries. She had stayed awake on countless nights when he was an infant, rocking him to sleep, soothing his tears. She knew the way his hair smelled after playing in the fields, the softness of his tiny hands when he reached for hers. Now, those small details became sources of unbearable pain. His bed was suddenly empty. The sound of his laughter, once echoing through the home, had fallen silent. She would fold his clothes and break down in tears, unable to comprehend that the boy she had nurtured was gone. In Victorian times, mothers were often expected to hide their emotions, to remain composed in public. But grief cannot be silenced. Behind closed doors, she cried endlessly. Every corner of the home reminded her of him. The dishes he ate from, the toys he played with, even the door he once ran through became unbearable reminders of absence. For the father, the grief was different but just as deep. In 1887, men were expected to be stoic, to provide, to protect. He could not collapse openly the way his wife did. Society told him he had to remain strong, but inside he was shattered. He had dreamed of teaching his boy the skills of his trade, of walking with him in the fields, of one day calling him a man. He had imagined a future where his son would take care of the family after him, where the legacy of his name would continue. Now, all those dreams were buried with the boy. Late at night, when the house was quiet, the father would sit alone, staring at the boy's shoes by the door or the chair where he once sat. His heart carried a silence louder than any scream. Fathers often grieve in silence, but their pain is no less than that of the mother. It is simply hidden, pressed down until it eats away from within. What makes the grief of parents so unique is that it is not just the loss of a person, it is the loss of possibility. When a child dies, parents grieve not only the present but also the future. They mourn the birthdays that will never come, the milestones never reached, the laughter never heard again. The boy's parents would have imagined his first day at school, his teenage years, perhaps even his wedding. Now, all of that was gone. Their home felt hollow. Neighbors may have offered condolences, but once the days of mourning passed, life for others continued. For the parents, however, life was permanently changed. Every sunrise was a reminder of the son who would never see it. And yet, despite the pain, they had to keep living. They had other responsibilities, perhaps other children, and the cruel reality of survival in the 19th century did not allow much time for endless mourning. But grief does not fade simply because work must continue. It lingers in the background, showing up unexpectedly. In the quiet moments, in the silence between conversations, in the sudden tears that come without warning. To cope, the parents turned to memory. The post-mortem photograph became their most precious possession. Though some outsiders found it unsettling, for them it was a lifeline. Whenever the mother feared she might forget his face, she would look at the picture and whisper to herself, "I remember, I will never forget you." They also turned to faith. In 1887, religion was a source of comfort for many families. They told themselves that their boy was now an angel, spared the hardships of life, waiting for them in eternity. This belief didn't erase the pain, but it gave them a framework to carry it. What makes their grief so meaningful for us today is the lesson it carries. Love is stronger than death. Parents in every century, in every culture, experience the same heartbreak when they lose a child. Time may change technology, medicine, and customs, but the depth of parental love never changes. Their grief also shows us the importance of cherishing the present. We often take our loved ones for granted, assuming tomorrow will always come, but grief teaches us that tomorrow is never guaranteed. The boy's parents would have given anything for just one more day with him, one more laugh, one more hug. Their sorrow is a reminder for us not to waste the days we do have. Over time, grief does not disappear, it transforms. For the boy's parents, it became a silent strength. They learned to live with the absence, to carry him in memory rather than in their arms. This is the paradox of parental grief. It breaks the heart but also deepens the soul. It teaches resilience, empathy, and an appreciation for life's fragile beauty. Even in their darkest hours, their love for their son did not die. That love continued to shape their lives, their choices, and their outlook. The grief of parents is proof that while death takes life, it cannot take love. Though the story happened in 1887, the grief of parents is timeless. It is shared by mothers and fathers in every corner of the world who have lost children in wars, in accidents, in illnesses. It connects humanity across generations, and if there is one message this grief offers, it is this: cherish every moment. Do not hold back your love. Do not postpone your affection. Tell your children, your family, your friends how much they mean to you, because one day it may be too late. Loss has always been one of humanity's greatest teachers. It strips away illusions, forces us to see what truly matters, and often teaches us lessons we would never have chosen for ourselves. In 1887, when the little boy's life ended so suddenly, his family entered into a classroom of grief that no one wants to attend. Yet out of their suffering came lessons that resonate far beyond their time. Lessons about fragility, gratitude, resilience, and the meaning of life itself. To understand their loss, we must first understand the era in which they lived. In the late 1800s, childhood mortality was devastatingly high. Illnesses like tuberculosis, diphtheria, scarlet fever, and influenza claimed countless young lives. Vaccines were limited, antibiotics were undiscovered, and even a simple infection could turn fatal. Parents lived with constant fear, though they rarely spoke of it. Every fever raised the question, will my child survive this? In many towns, cemeteries filled with small graves told the tragic truth: not all children live to see adulthood. For the boy's parents, the loss was both personal and universal. Personal because it was their beloved son, universal because nearly every family knew the same pain. From this reality came the first lesson: life is fragile and every moment is precious. The boy's death reminded his family, and now reminds us, that time is a gift, not a guarantee. His parents would have given anything for just one more day with him, one more chance to watch him laugh, to hear him run across the floorboards, to feel his tiny hand in theirs. And yet, how often do we, in our own lives, forget this truth? We rush through days assuming there will always be more. We put off words of love, believing there will be another chance tomorrow. The boy's story tells us otherwise. Tomorrow is not promised. The greatest lesson loss teaches is urgency. Live and love while you still can. Grief has a strange way of sharpening the memory. The boy's parents likely remembered every little detail after his death. The way he smiled when he saw his mother, the sound of his father's voice calming him, the way he played with small toys in the dirt. Those moments, once ordinary, became treasures once he was gone. This is the second lesson of loss. Be grateful for the ordinary while it still surrounds you. A hug, a shared meal, a laugh at the dinner table. These may seem small, but they are what life is made of. The boy's absence taught his family, and can teach us, that ordinary moments are extraordinary once they are no longer possible. When grief hit, the boy's parents likely thought they could not survive it. The weight of burying a child feels impossible to carry. But somehow they continued. They woke up the next day, and the day after that. They worked, they ate, they breathed. Life pushed them forward even when their hearts resisted. This resilience is another lesson loss teaches. Humans are stronger than they know. Suffering is unbearable in the moment, but it shapes character, deepens empathy, and often leads to inner strength that cannot be developed any other way. The boy's parents, broken as they were, carried on. And in doing so, they showed us that grief may scar, but it does not have to destroy. Without modern cameras, videos, or social media, families of the 19th century relied on memory and symbols to preserve their loved ones. For the boy's parents, the post-mortem photograph became a lifeline. It was not just a picture, it was proof that he existed. This teaches another powerful truth: memories are a form of immortality. While the body may perish, the love, the stories, the shared moments live on. We carry our loved ones within us, and in doing so, we keep them alive in ways that matter most. When someone suffers a loss, they often gain a new sensitivity to the suffering of others. The boy's parents, through their own grief, may have found themselves comforting neighbors who later endured the same tragedy. Loss teaches compassion, because once you've walked through darkness, you recognize the shadows in others more easily. This is a lesson the boy's story still teaches us today: be kind, for everyone is carrying something unseen. Loss humbles us and reminds us that we are all fragile, all temporary, all in need of understanding. Perhaps the most profound lesson from the boy's story is this: though death took his body, it could not take the love his parents felt for him. That love lived on in their hearts, in the photograph, and in the stories they passed down. This truth remains universal. When we lose someone, we feel as though love has ended. But in reality, death cannot erase love. It only changes its form. The boy's parents carried him in memory, in dreams, and in faith that they would meet again. In this way, loss revealed a paradox: death ends a life, but not a relationship. Today, over a century later, we still speak of this boy and his family. We do not know his name, yet his story resonates. That is the final lesson of loss. The influence of a life is not measured by its length, but by its impact. The boy lived only a handful of years, yet his short existence continues to inspire reflection, compassion, and gratitude. His parents' grief became the soil from which these lessons grew, and now, more than 130 years later, they still echo: do not waste time. Ye cherish the ordinary. He finds strength in suffering. He honor memory. He show compassion. He remember that love endures. The boy's parents did not choose to learn these lessons. They were forced upon them by tragedy. And yet, by carrying them, they left a gift for us. Loss is painful, but it can also be transformative. If we listen to its lessons, we can live with more gratitude, more love, and more purpose. The boy of 1887 may not have grown into a man, but through the lessons born of his loss, he continues to shape lives today. His silence speaks louder than many voices. His short life teaches us to live ours fully. When the boy's life ended in 1887, his parents were plunged into a darkness that felt endless. The loss of a child is not only grief, it is the shattering of hope. the breaking of a future that will never come. For days, weeks, and even years, that emptiness lingered. Yet, from this unbearable pain, something remarkable slowly emerged. Motivation. It was not immediate, and it was not easy, but little by little, the darkness that surrounded them began to teach them how to live differently. This is the paradox of loss. Sometimes the greatest motivation is born from the deepest despair. In the beginning, the boy's parents could not see beyond their sorrow. The house felt too quiet, the meals tasteless, the air heavy with absence. The smallest reminders cut like knives. His toys, his empty bed, the echo of laughter that no longer filled the rooms. Grief often tempts people to surrender, to stop living, because life feels meaningless without the one they lost. The parents felt this temptation. But even in their darkness there was a whisper, a quiet sense that their son's short life could not be in vain. If they gave up entirely, it would be as though he had never lived. They wanted his memory to mean something. Motivation did not arrive like a sudden light. It came in fragments. It began when the father forced himself to return to work, telling himself that providing for his family was now even more important. It came when the mother decided to take care of herself and her home, even on days when she wanted to collapse. They realized that every small act of survival, working, cooking, speaking, was a way of honoring the child they had lost. Over time, this purpose grew. Instead of drowning in sorrow, they began to see their son's memory as a reason to live better. He had been denied the gift of a long life, but they still had theirs. They could waste it in grief, or they could live in a way that reflected his value. The post-mortem photograph played an unexpected role in this transformation. At first, it was simply a painful reminder. They would look at it and cry, wishing desperately that it showed him alive instead of still. But as time passed, the image began to change its meaning. It became a symbol, almost like the boy's silent voice speaking to them. Do not waste the life you still have. Live for me, since I cannot live for myself. Every glance at the photograph reminded them not only of loss, but of responsibility. Their son's memory gave them the strength to push forward when they wanted to give up. From this shift grew a powerful lesson: life, no matter how short or long, must be cherished. The boy had only a handful of years, yet in those years he gave his parents immense joy. They began to ask themselves, what are we doing with the time we still have? Instead of being crushed by grief, they allowed it to awaken them. They began to appreciate simple things more deeply. The sound of rain on the roof, the laughter of neighbors' children, the warmth of sunlight after a long winter. Loss had made them sensitive to life's fragile beauty, and that sensitivity became motivation, to not waste days in bitterness, but to honor their child by truly living. One of the most powerful ways grief can transform into motivation is through compassion. Having experienced devastating loss, the boy's parents recognized the same pain in others. When neighbors lost children, they were the first to offer comfort, not empty words. They could embrace grieving families and say with honesty, "We understand. You are not alone." This compassion became part of their legacy. Their son's short life inspired them to become sources of comfort for others. Their darkness had given them the motivation to shine light in someone else's suffering. Over time, their motivation grew beyond survival and compassion. It became about legacy. They asked themselves, what kind of people will we become because of this loss? Instead of bitterness, they chose resilience. Instead of despair, they chose gratitude. Instead of silence, they chose to keep their son's memory alive by speaking of him, cherishing him, and living in a way that reflected his worth. This is a lesson for all of us. The greatest honor we can give those we have lost is not endless tears, but meaningful lives. The boy's story, preserved through time, continues to motivate not just his parents but also strangers who learn of it more than a century later. His photograph may be haunting, but it is also inspiring. It tells us, do not waste your days. Do not take your loved ones for granted. Do not let grief destroy you, let it transform you. What began as darkness in one family has become motivation across generations. The boy, who never had the chance to live fully, now lives through the lessons his story teaches us. The transformation from grief to motivation is not about forgetting, The boy's parents never forgot him, and neither should we. Rather, it is about letting grief push us to act, to change, to live differently. The darkness of loss whispers a simple but urgent truth: life is short. Use it wisely. That is the core motivation born from tragedy. Every morning we have a choice: to waste the gift of life or to honor it. For the boy's parents, that choice became clear. Though their hearts never stopped aching, they learned to live in such a way that their son's memory became a source of strength, not only sorrow. The story of the boy who was preserved in 1887 is not just about death, it is about transformation. His life ended in darkness, but his memory sparked motivation that stretched beyond his family, beyond his town, even beyond his century. The lesson is timeless: a pain can destroy us, or it can rebuild us. Darkness can swallow us, or it can drive us toward light. The boy's short life and tragic death remind us to choose the latter, to let even the darkest losses push us toward love, compassion, and purpose. His parents lost their child, but they gained a reason to live differently. And through their choice, his story became not just one of sorrow, but one of enduring motivation. When the boy's parents decided to take a post-mortem photograph in 1887, they could never have imagined the impact it would have beyond their own grief. At the time, it was a simple act of remembrance, a way to hold on to their son's face, his presence, his very existence. But more than 130 years later, that single photograph has become more than a family keepsake. It has become a legacy. The photograph is haunting, yes. To modern eyes, it may even appear disturbing. But if we look beyond the stillness of death, we see something else: a story frozen in time, a symbol of parental love, and a lesson for generations. The photograph gives us a window into life and death in the 19th century. We learn not only about the boy but also about the culture, the struggles, and the values of the Victorian era. In a time when childhood death was tragically common, photographs like his were acts of love and remembrance. Without such images, the boy's life might have vanished completely into history. His name is lost, his voice silenced, his toys and clothes long gone. But the photograph remains. It tells us, silently yet powerfully, I was here, I lived, I mattered. This is the first layer of the photograph's legacy. It preserves memory when all else has faded. For his parents, the photograph was never just an image. It was a connection. In moments of deep grief, they could look at it and feel as though their son was still with them, watching over them. The picture became a sacred object, a symbol of love that transcended death. That love is part of the photograph's legacy. Even now, when strangers look at it more than a century later, they sense the devotion behind it. It is not just a picture of a boy. It is evidence of parents who refuse to let their child's memory fade into oblivion. Most photographs are personal. They remain within families, tucked into albums or frames. But this boy's photograph escaped those boundaries. It has been studied, preserved, and shared as part of the historical record. And in that process, his life has touched countless strangers across time. This teaches us something: profound memories, once captured, can ripple far beyond what we expect. A single image, act, or word can outlive us, shaping people we will never meet. In this way, the boy's photograph is not just his family's legacy. It has become part of humanity's legacy. It reminds us all of the fragility of life, the inevitability of death, and the enduring power of love. When the shutter clicked in 1887, the boy's parents wanted one thing: remembrance. They did not take the picture for history books or documentaries. They took it for themselves. And yet, the photograph has come to teach a message that even they could not have imagined. To us today, surrounded by cameras and endless digital images, the photograph is a sobering contrast. It whispers, do not waste the ability to remember. Do not waste the chance to preserve the living. We take thousands of photos in our lifetimes, often without thinking. Yet, in the boy's time, one photograph carried the weight of eternity. His image teaches us to value what we capture, and more importantly, to value the people themselves, not just their pictures. The photograph also carries a message about time. It shows a boy whose life was cut short, a child who never had the chance to grow into adulthood. It forces us to ask, what if my time, or the time of those I love, were just as brief? This is the motivational power of the photograph. It does not only remind us of death, it urges us toward life. It pushes us to cherish our families, to speak our love out loud, to pursue dreams without delay. The boy's still image is not just about the end of life. It is about the urgency of living while we still can. Though the picture belongs to one family from 1887, its legacy is universal. Every parent who has lost a child, every person who has faced grief, can look at it and feel a connection. It bridges time and geography, reminding us that human emotions are eternal. Love, grief, and memory are experiences that transcend centuries. The boy's photograph allows us to touch those universal truths, to feel less alone in our own experiences of loss. In this way, his story belongs not only to his parents, but to all of us. The photograph transformed private grief into a collective lesson. The boy's parents could not have imagined that strangers more than a century later would draw strength and reflection from their sorrow. Yet here we are, still speaking of him, still learning from their choice to preserve his image. This shows us something extraordinary. Our actions, even in grief, can outlive us and inspire others. What feels personal may one day become universal. What feels small may ripple into history. In the end, the boy gave the world a gift he never knew he could give: perspective. His photograph is not only disturbing, it is moving. It disturbs us not because of death, but because it reminds us of life's brevity and beauty. His legacy is not sorrow but urgency, not despair but motivation. He could not live long, but his story continues to tell us: value the time you are given, love fiercely, live fully. The legacy of the photograph is this: one child, gone too soon, continues to influence hearts more than a century later. His image remains a symbol of love, a mirror of grief, and a teacher of life's most essential truths. We may never know his name, but we know his lesson. And perhaps that is the most important legacy of all, that a life, no matter how brief, can echo far into the future when preserved with love. The boy of 1887 is gone, but his story is not. His parents' choice to capture his likeness created a legacy far greater than they imagined. Today, that legacy whispers to us all: do not let your own life slip by unnoticed. Leave behind more than silence. Leave behind love, memory, and meaning.